we go, YouTube. I started without you. Cut the dual wheels off. Pulled out the axle. Now I've got to take the wheel bearing off here, and they have it locked with 2 Phillips head screws. Unfortunately, I don't have the proper wrench for taking off the wheel bearing, so I'll have to get one now that I've got the truck or the camper. Okay, take out the lock screws, and from the look of it, there's no preload on these things anyway. It's always, mechanics are always different how they do it. Some of them put a bit of preload, some of them don't. Everybody's a bit different. Okay, this is just the retainer, and it slides straight out, and that's what was held on by the screws. Now here is the wheel bearing. Adjusting that, and because there's no preload, it'll just spin right off. There we go. Okay, next, I always make sure I get the drum loose, but don't dump the, try my best not to dump the bearing. There we go. You see how I caught that? Just using the, I'll show you here. Just used the screwdriver, stuck it in the axle. The bearing fell and jammed. It didn't fall into the gravel driveway I'm playing on. I'll have to clean these and check them. There is grease on them, but not as much as likely should be there, and it looks like it's aged pretty good. So at minimum, I knew I was going to be doing a repack on the bearings anyway. Okay, now the drum can slide off. And this is just a very basic braking system here. Shoes. You have your wheel cylinder here, which is the actuator. And because of the size of this motorhome, there's actually, the 2 shoes are the same size. In most cars, you'll have the front shoe will be shorter by a little bit. And the reason they do that is you get a little more pressure on here, on the primary shoe as it's called. And then it pushes, because of the rotation of the wheel, this one will grab and rotate up against the adjuster here, known as the star wheel adjuster, which will then push on this shoe here, and it's called servo action, and this will come up and push onto the pin here, the anchor. This is a return spring, which helps return this shoe. This is a return spring for the front shoe. This bar and spring just keeps tension on this arm here, which is used primarily for the parking brake. The parking brake cable being in the back here pulls on this, which actually will then push on this rod, which will apply the parking brake with the front brake shoe. This is all that holds your drum brakes on, people. Just a couple of things look like nails and a couple of springs that just turn and go 90 degrees. This cable here, you see it comes from the top there, it comes around a little shield here, but it comes around there and comes down and hooks onto this little arm here, and you notice this one has an R on it for the right side. This is actually what adjusts the brakes. brakes like this adjust when you're backing up. When you back up and you apply the brakes, you get that reverse servo action. So this will rotate counterclockwise on this side, and when it does that, it actually pulls on this cable. And if there's enough pull on it, you can see when it pulls, it moves that lever up and down. When there's enough pull, it will engage the next tooth on the star wheel and rotate down to adjust the brakes. And then every time you back up, it'll do that. It'll go up until it engages, and it'll adjust your brakes again. But it only does it when you're backing, and that's all done with what they call the servo action. Now in this vehicle, in a lot of vehicles with this kind of rear differential and dual wheels, the wheel bearings are lubricated with the axle lubricant, or the gear lube, and it'll come out the tube when you're turning corners and come out and actually go into the hub and lubricate the bearings. That's not the case with this one. This one has an axle seal here to keep the gear lube inside, and I'm going to replace that. And there's also a seal here which keeps the dirt and debris out and the grease in. Now on a vehicle where these are lubricated by the gear lube from the differential, it will still have a seal here to stop the gear lube from getting in. And this seal here actually rides up on this little flat here, and if it leaks, it'll get through and it'll contaminate your brake linings. I'm going to replace that seal too, and here's the inner wheel bearing that will be replaced as well. And while I have it apart, what I will also do is I clean inside the hub, clean all that extra grease out, and put fresh grease into it. And that's all part of doing the wheel bearings on this vehicle. I normally have a parts dish. I couldn't find it because I'm disorganized again, but a good old coffee can is going to work fine. And when I do a repair like this, I throw the wheel bearings in the can. Okay, where's the can? There it is. The lock ring, the adjusting nut. I'll also clean the two small Phillips screws that lock it in place. These are the bolts that went into the hub to hold the axle in place, and although they're outside of the hub where there's grease and everything, I clean it anyway. And I also clean off the axle. Brass drift. When I hammer the bearing out here, it's the only thing holding the bearing in this hub. The bearing is right here, as you can see. The only thing holding it in is this seal. To get that seal out, I hammer on the bearing, and you don't want to hammer on the bearing with anything but a brass drift, because you don't find the get it on the bearing inside here, and I'll just very carefully tap, and I'll move it around 180 degrees, tap again. I'll go 90 degrees, tap, 180 degrees to that, tap, and I'll just keep working around like that. There it goes. Okay. Lift that off, and by using the can it works great because it drops right into the can, obviously. Here's your it's a tapered roller bearing again. That's what they're called, like this. You can see there's grease here. I don't know how well you can see, but you can tell by the discoloration that it's got very fine grit in it, and you can tell by the discoloration that it's just time to be replaced. So this is going to be cleaned out spotless. Mechanics also refer to this as a cone. Where the bearing rides is a little tapered sleeve. Bearing and race is properly what they're called. This being the bearing, that being the race. And these roller bearings all are separate, and this outer assembly here is strictly to hold these spaced out, spaced from one another and evenly spaced all the way around the bearing. Once I have everything cleaned up, I will show you how I repack wheel bearings. In the meantime, what I'm doing is I'm just doing a quick wipe on the seal here. And what I'm looking for is a number. There will be a series of numbers. It will be a manufacturer. Okay. Manufacturer's logo is right there. I don't know if you can focus on that or not. Okay. And as I rotate this, you'll see a series of numbers, and these numbers will identify this seal. So I can quote this code to the parts department, to the parts counter, and they should be able to find one of these seals for me. Now I'm going to give a quick wipe, but this is the inner seal. I'm just giving it a quick wipe. And in this case, this is an NTN bearing. It's made in Japan. And there's your part number. Now the parts counter should be able to reference that to any other bearing that has the exact dimensions of this one if you were replacing it. And there will also be a number stamped on the cup or on the race. In this case, although I haven't cleaned them yet, I can tell the bearings look pretty good. There's no discoloration. Just cleaning out the outer bearing now, just a little bit. Once again, NTN bearing, made in Japan, and there's the part number. Now there are seal pullers available, and they do work well, but most of the time mechanics will improvise. I just use a slotted screwdriver by inserting it in behind the seal on one side and prying on the housing on the other side, and I just give it a quick pry. See, it should. This is a case where I might need to use a seal puller. Okay, that is gonna fight me, so I'm gonna go and get. I don't have a puller for that, but I do have something close. What I've got here is a slide hammer, but this one is for pulling pilot bearings and pilot bushings, which are used as part of the clutch system on a car or vehicle with a manual gearbox. The pilot bearing or bushing goes in the back of the crankshaft, and the front of the transmission, the input shaft of the transmission, it just steadies it so it doesn't wobble around in the middle of the clutch. So, and the way this works is it's fairly tight and small, but you can see it's threaded here, and as you thread that in, it forces the two little arms apart. So you put that in the seal, like so, and then I'll just rotate it till it's tight. And I'll try and get it as tight as I can, and then just